Welcome to Passion for Quilting.
I'm going to show you today how I do my foundation paper piecing. This isn't the only way, but this is the way that I do it, and it might help you. And I use a postcard or a business card to help me. And what I do is, on the first part, I've cut my ring apart, and on the first part I fold it back to the business card. Then I take my two fabrics, and fabric 2 is on the top, and I lay them along the edge of my fabric, giving me 1/4 of an inch seam. You can test your fabric to see, when you open this one, is that going to be the right fabric for this one? And it is for me. I've also got enough at this end, and I've got enough at this end, and then I take it to the machine. I just have my machine set to a straight stitch. I open the flap and I just sew down that line. I don't come into the seam, I just stop at the edge of the point, and I always do a little reverse stitch. Some people finger press that, but what I find if I finger press it is I get a little pleat here. So I always just give it a little press. So I take my card again, and now I'm on the next line. I fold it back, get out of the way, and I use my 1/4 of an inch ruler. This is invaluable for me, and I bring it against that piece of paper, do the cut, put that to one side, and then you take the next piece, which for me, I'm just using 2 colours, and I place it along the side. See, you've got the perfect 1/4 of an inch seam. Take your piece of paper, open it out, sew on the line all the way to the seam, do a little reverse stitch. Now, this gets in my way, so what I do is I fold it up like this so that it's a lot more manageable. I use a couple of clips and I clip it in place. Then when this part gets too big, I fold this one up and I open this one out, so that I'm always working with just a small piece. Then I go back to this piece, using my card, line it up on the third line, bring it across, as you can see, I'm now on to the next little wedge. I bring it back, put the ruler against it, cut. And you just proceed around your arc in the same fashion. It's actually quite therapeutic once you get going. Bring it back to the table, give it a press, and you can see my arc beginning to come together. I'll show you it when I'm finished. And don't throw these pieces away, because in Jacqueline's in patterns, not in this particular, the first session, but in the second session, you use the second half of these to do further around the wedge. Now I've got a postcard, and I've also got my business card. You can use either. It doesn't have to reach the whole thing because it just folds over. As long as you've got something to fold over, it works really well. This clip's going to get in the way, so I'm going to take that off. Cut. Open up my arc a little bit, put the clips back on. And if I wanted to, I could just fold up this end, but right now it's not big, very big, so I can just go like this. So now I'm ready for my next section. Onto the machine, flip the paper over. Press and cut. Use the business card this time. See, I just line it up on the line, flip it back over, use my finger, add 1/4 of an inch. Flip it over. Oh, don't forget to take your card away. Remember, your numbers are not there to intimidate you. If you're doing the Jacqueline one, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. They're the order that you sew, and then the other numbers are the fabric. Postcard this time. Fold it over on the line. Use your add 1/4 of an inch ruler. And if you are on the Brilliant Beauties of Joy block of the month, we'll give you 10% off of one of those rulers if you email us and ask us. Take your colour, add it, flip it over, the little stars on your pattern are your marking points. So once you've trimmed off your edge, use a white marker or a marker appropriate for the colour you're using, and just mark all these, because this is how you put your arcs together with the next part. So that's quite an important part, not to forget to add those marks. It goes quite quickly once you get into a rhythm. And if you're starting off on the Brilliant Beauties of Joy first block, I would say start with the bigger arc before you start the smaller arc, because then you're in the rhythm, because the smaller arc is a little bit smaller and a little bit more awkward to sew. If you have this little station set up, it stops you having to keep getting up and down and twisting around. Everything is to hand. It just makes it so much easier. I don't use an excessively small stitch, because if you need to undo it, stitches are very small. If you do need to undo it and you tear your foundation paper, use a bit of Scotch tape, or the sort of white opaque tape is what I call the Scotch tape, to just put it back together. If I use sellotape, I find that sometimes when I iron over that, it shrivels up. And if you've got them in front of you in the right order, it just makes the job so much easier. And if you read the instructions, Jacqueline does tell you which order to put them in. And it's not necessarily the order that you've cut them in. I always say you can use white, cream or grey. You couldn't possibly use colours that match all of the colours on your quilt. Just a little bit, because it's getting a bit long. So you can see I'm only working on a small part of the arc at one time. That way it doesn't get in my way. And if you don't have these little clips, you can use bulldog clips. You can use a pin, but watch your fingers. If you don't have a postcard or a business card, you can use an old birthday card. Just something that will give you that edge that you can fold it over. Make sure if you think your fabric's moved underneath, just use your needle down position or your foot and just move it back into place. On the first part of the block of the month, you don't use the offcuts, but in part 2 you use them for the same arc. So I don't throw them away, I keep them in my box. That way you know that you've always got a little bit of extra fabric. If you take the next fabric, and if I look at my wedge, this is the widest end of the wedge, so I'm taking the widest end of the fabric and putting the straight edge to it. And then it's the same process. And you press it out. Flip back. You see you've still got plenty of fabric to trim off with your 1/4 inch. So you're actually wasting very little fabric. And it's the same with the other colour. You look at which is the widest edge of the wedge, which on this time it's this time. So you take that, the widest edge of your fabric to that end. Flip over. Press back to the cutting board using the postcard. Trim. Always nice to finish an arc. If I open it out, you can see it's done all the way around. So if we go over to my other cutting table, I'll show you now how I cut it.
That's the arc now completed. And now what I'm going to show you is how I trim mine. I turn it over to the wrong side so I can see the paper. And you can use your rotary cutter or you can use your scissors. When I use the rotary cutter, I have to make sure that I go over the seams a couple of times because they're a little bit thick and it doesn't always cut. So you can see I roll it backwards and forwards a little bit. It is a little bit easier with the scissors, but you don't get such a sharp edge. Use whichever way suits you, and be careful of the rotary blade, don't get your fingers too close to it. To do the inside, it's the same procedure, but it's slightly more awkward with the rotary cutter. So when I cut the inside edge, I always use the scissors, and I'm cutting on the seam line. Don't cut off the outside, the seam line, and you don't need to cut the 1/4 inch on the edge, it's already there. Don't forget to put your marks in where those little stars are. They help you pin it to the next part of the project. It doesn't take very long to do this procedure. Nearly at the end now. The last little corner. There we are, complete. Hope you've enjoyed watching this video. And there's the completed circle. All I have to do now is join the two edges with a 1/4 inch seam.